Welcome to FromRome.Info video, broadcasting here from the Lwowski Palace. I can't pronounce it correctly. The summer palace of King Stanislaus of Poland, which is now a public garden here in the south part of Warsaw, Poland. A beautiful scene. The palace itself is on an island in the midst of a man-made lake. I'll wait a few minutes before everyone gathers since I've turned the camera on a bit early. We have a lot of things. I have a lot of things to discuss and report today. My name is Brother Alexis Bugnolo. I am the publisher and editor of FromRome.Info, an electronic journal for news and commentary about Rome, the Vatican, and Italy, on special assignment here in Poland to cover the humanitarian crisis and the war in the Ukraine. Before I touch on the war in the Ukraine, I will discuss some news from Rome, since FromRome.Info concentrates primarily on Rome. And on the 25th, it was announced by the Vatican Press Office that on the 25th of March, Bugnolo has decided to consecrate Russia and the Ukraine to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. And there's a whole hullabaloo on social media about this. There's a big confusion. He has not decided to consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart to fulfill the promises of Fatima. He is merely going to do it himself. He said, I will do it. I will make this consecration. As far as I know, the bishops of the world are not being invited to join him. Doesn't surprise you, he's an ecumeniac. And as the Cardinal Archbishop of Buenos Aires, he has no authority to consecrate Ukraine or Russia. So it's going to be a big nothing burger, but everyone who's invested in Bugnolo as being legitimate is invested in this consecration having some effect. I don't know why. They've given up on the narrative that the consecration done by John Paul II was valid and they need a new one. It's kind of like certain medicines where the first one doesn't work, you have to get a second, third, fourth, and fifth. You know what I'm talking about, but I can't mention it because I'm on YouTube. So we see the same kind of ridiculousness. And this has to do with the gaslighting that takes place when people have allowed themselves to be propagandized. And people are manipulated by propaganda when they allow something that's not reality and not the truth to be accepted as the truth and reality, and replace that. And they fasten themselves on it because it fills some deep or perverse psychological need for security, which they should be getting from God, from reality, and from normal relationships, but they seek it in other ways. And we see a lot of this kind of psychosis in modern times, and the Masonic Lodge promotes this kind of psychosis. And we see it, sadly enough, on all those people who are attacking the Ukraine and want Russia to conquer the Ukraine. And I speak about 75% of the conservatives in the West who are more adamant believers in Putin than his own troops, which are deserting on the field, sometimes quite noticeably, even in armored columns abandoned without reason. And this is very sad because in the last 2 years we have seen a claim made about reality, and the claim has been taken as reality. People didn't bother to see if they didn't even go down to the local funeral home and ask, are the number of deaths up? And now that deaths are up from the alleged cure to this alleged health problem, no one's going down to the mortuary to find out why is it up and how much it's up. They're living in their own reality. They didn't want to find out about reality. They closed into the world of the narrative. They lived in isolation of that for 2 years mentally, and now they won't even admit they made the wrong decision, taking medicines they shouldn't take. And not taking medicines they should take. And we see the same thing now with Russian propaganda. The more at From Rome I publish news about Russian atrocities, killing of civilians, shooting at non-combatants, destruction of civilian housing, the more these people just go wild, their heads explode into like purple dust, and they write me demanding to be unsubscribed. And I admit there is a slight problem with the unsubscription system at From Rome. So you could have, if you do have a problem unsubscribing, do write me and I'll unsubscribe you. But it seems to be always on the post of the Russian atrocities they decide to unsubscribe because it's threatening the narrative they have chosen for their reality. So in the last 2 years, the correct decision was to reject the narrative and accept reality. And in the current crisis in the war in the Ukraine, most of the reporting is reality and true. And if you're stuck in the rut of rejecting the narrative that's being pushed by the mass media, you're now falling outside of reality, and you have to live on the myth that Putin is a savior, that he's not destroying cities, that he's not having civilians shot in the street, that his troops aren't robbing buildings, raping women, kidnapping mayors, kidnapping hospital staff, ethnic cleansing. Go on. Do I have to go on? So committing violating international law, committing war crimes. That reality impinges on their myth of Putin the savior, the big divine daddy savior that they want. Now, as Christians, we shouldn't have any idols in our heart. The Lord God should be alone our God. In him alone should we worship, and we should have no false gods before him. It means nothing else on the altar except the most holy Trinity. And if that's not how your interior altar is arranged, you're going to be putting the trust and hope and confidence and love and devotion and loyalty and faith and hope and fidelity that you should have towards God, towards something else that's not God, whether it's television or whether it is Putin. And I published that from Rome. Sufficient reports from Father Karen, a Greek Catholic bishop of the Ukraine, I forget his name, excuse me, and other experts that show Putin has always been a kleptomaniac. He's a criminal, he's a KGB agent. He's not a sincere, honest Christian at all. It's like Father Karen says, the Russian Orthodox, the religion is of appearance, but in practice they don't really keep it. So it's kind of like the Sicilian mafia that go to the traditional Latin Mass, but don't have any morality. And that's, you call it the Stockholm effect, the Russian Stockholm effect. I don't know what you call it, but it's sad. You would think that now after 2 weeks, when people see that Russia is not waging an honest and just war, they would write back and say, I'm sorry for calling you a bunch of names, a jackass, a New World shill, a CIA agent, devoid of humility, and on and on and on. They always break off. Only one out of maybe 100 wrote me a kind, polite letter saying, I'm not going to read your site anymore. Everyone else, it was absolute vicious insults from people who praised me to the skies. So I'm glad I'm no longer an idol on their heart, the altar of their heart. I hope they get Jesus Christ back on there. And this is the nimbleness we need to have as Christians. What does Christ teach, and what does his moral law demand? And in every situation, judge it according to that standard, not according to a habit of being pro-media or against the media, pro-government or against the government, pro-police or against the police, or pro-anything in this world or against anything in this world. What is the teaching of Christ? And that should lead us on how we behave in every situation. And that is a nimbleness we need to have that keeps us detached from this world. Because otherwise we will fixate on some ideology that will suck us down to hell, because it will eventually lead us to do things or say things that are contrary to the gospel. And that's why anyone who finds themselves shocked that I'm in Poland helping humanitarian crisis, or I want to assist in the Ukrainian military effort, doesn't know their faith well. You didn't know me, okay? So I didn't hide the fact that I was president of Ordo Militaris, a co-founder of that association. I published information about that in my blog for years, and no one ever objected to it until I actually came here to Poland. Then heads started exploding. And none of these people are even Russian. This is the amazing thing. They're not even Russian. So President Zelensky of the Ukraine, who is not a man of high morals by any means, spoke to the U.S. Congress, and he was received a standing ovation. And the U.S. is going to send, I think, $15 billion more of military aid. Many countries are also sending military aid. Britain is going to send something, and Greece is sending, and Czechoslovakia, and the prime ministers of Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Poland went to Kiev by train yesterday, even while all the war is going on around it, and pledged their support. They're going to aim to form a new non-NATO, non-EU alliance of Slavic nations as a security alliance in the East, with a sharing of military supplies to help each country defend itself in the case of attack. Very good initiative, and I'm glad that this crisis has brought brothers of ancient blood together, the Slavs, and realized that they can do it too. They don't have to rely on the West. I want to make a brief comment about racism. Racism is a term misused by the left, but there is a true racism where you denigrate people of a certain ethnicity or bloodline, and we almost never talk about the racism against the Slavs. It's very profound in the West, and it's ancient, and it arises from, I think, the historical circumstance that the Romans, the Italians, took what the Greeks had achieved and brought it to flowering, and brought civilization to most of Europe, and that was not in the sections of Europe where the Slavs lived. They were consequently, in cultural and technological development, considered to be inferior, and were in technological development inferior for centuries until modern times. And so from that arose some prejudice. In the Middle Ages, many slaves were Slavs, and in the English language, our word slave comes from Slav. It is not at all the Latin word. The Latin word for slave is servus, which means servant, because the Romans didn't have perpetual slavery. They only had indentured servitude, and you could always buy yourself out of slavery in the Roman world, and it's best to call it servitude, not slavery. But most of the slaves in the Middle Ages were Slavs, and they were imported from the East, and this is an ancient, latent prejudice in Europe and in Europeans, although it has remained latent in recent centuries since people have forgotten about it. But I think it has a lot to do with the fact that all of a sudden 75% of the conservatives don't want to defend Ukraine. Well, you know, if it was France being attacked, or Italy, or Spain, or land they had their blood from, like Ireland or England, they'd all be up in arms. But you know, there are a lot of people from Eastern Europe who live in Canada and the United States. I found out yesterday that a sixth of the Canadians are of Ukrainian origin. And the United States, of Slavs, we probably have a good 10%. There are Ukrainian Catholic churches in the United States, and there are a lot of Poles, Czechs, Hungarians are not Slavs, but Serbians, Bulgarians, Romanians, Moldavians, Russians, Belarusians, Lithuanians, they're not Slavs, but from Eastern Europe, and the Baltic countries, and Poles in the United States. And so we shouldn't feel any less for them than we do for other countries where we have immigrants from, like, you know, the Western European countries, should we? And we shouldn't come up with the most absurd excuses to close our hearts to them and write them off and throw them literally under the bus. Now, a measure of this, as an anthropologist, I look at what happened 18 months ago with fertilizer depository blowing up in downtown Peru, and 70 people were killed, and a good part of the city was instantly destroyed. And our organization, Ordo Militaris, did a fundraiser, and we raised $15,000 for that cause. But we have multiple cities being bombed in the Ukraine, millions on the move as refugees, thousands of people being killed, both in the military and civilians, absolute tragedies. that aren't caused by an accident in a fertilizer storage factory, but by deliberate, unjust war. And people seem incapable of responding to that. I don't know, maybe because the Lebanese are just more generous and people feel for the Lebanese that they don't feel for the Ukrainians. Now, we need to take a lesson from the Polish people. I think most people in the United States and in the English-speaking West, we have a great respect for the Poles, for their strength of their Christian faith, their moral virtue, their character, their feistiness, the fact that they defeated the Bolsheviks and kept Europe free, the tragedies they have suffered in 2 world wars, and the strong moral positions they and their governments have taken in recent decades in Europe since the fall of communism. And the example they're giving is welcoming all the Ukrainian refugees they can into their country, in their own homes, not in refugee centers, and in sending all the military and material assistance they can to the Ukraine. And that's where all Catholics should be. They should be doing exactly what Poland's doing. They shouldn't be creating excuses like, well, you know, the media lied for us for 2 years. I don't going to believe anything in the Ukraine, therefore I'm not going to help Ukrainians. Okay, so we need to distinguish, like I mentioned before, between reality and narrative. There is a war going on in the Ukraine. It's not a myth. People are dying. You can go on any social media and see pictures of people dying. Journalists who actually say, I met and talked to this person, now he's dead. Journalists on Fox News have been shot and killed. You know, this isn't a claim of deaths or a manufacturing of deaths by wrong medical procedures in hospitals that are empty where nurses are dancing on TikTok. This is not, you know. So there's enough information out there for you, a sane person, to realize this is reality, even if the people you don't like are actually on the right side. Okay? So, like I said before, if your nation's being attacked and your enemy and your past enemies want to help you, you accept the help. And if innocents are suffering and good and evil people are coming to their help, you don't say to the person that was just run over in the street, I'm not going to take you to the hospital because I see my enemies rushing to help you, and I'm not going to have anything to do with him. So if you drop dead, that's fine. That's not a Catholic or Christian response. And you need to snap out of that, because that is conservative brainwashing to turn you into a political robot that repeats talking points and reacts to everything as if it was legislation in Congress. And there's people, there's talking heads on the internet like that. They're just absolute mindless twits, and that's how they talk. They're absolutely heartless people. There's not a heart in them. And this kind of individualism is rightfully condemned because it's not Christianity. Christianity is not an individual thing. We should all feel together when any part of the body is suffering or persecuted. We shouldn't be like, oh, I'm American, I don't care anything about that. Well, when someone comes to help me, I'll help them. That's not Christianity. And it's not like Ukraine is a Marxist state. You know, it's not like people are saying, let's defend Cuba. Okay? It's a free liberal democracy. You may not like their government, but you got to distinguish between government and the people. And the government's not being bombed, pretty much. They fled to Lvov. It's the people in their homes, in the bread lines. 10 people were shot in a bread line yesterday by Russians while they were begging for bread. So, as far as the siege of Kiev, I'm just going to call it the siege of Kiev, though it's not strictly Kiev, the Russians have overwhelming military superiority. However, they don't have sufficient supplies to activate all the units, so they're only attacking on the northeast of the city, and they're having a hard time. They keep assaulting the city and getting driven back. And if they can supply in time, they will have enough force to enter the city. But they're trying to take the city with units that aren't designed for urban warfare, so it's going to get nasty. And if the war, if some peace agreement is not made between Ukraine and Russia, Kiev will probably be turned into like a city in Syria, completely destroyed. and uninhabitable, and the Russian army will just be wasted and destroyed. You can't take a city with armor. And it seems that on the northeast side, the Russian units are unsupplied there, so they're not active, and the Ukrainians are doing everything they can to prevent them from being resupplied. The south entrance of the city is still open, but now the city is under curfews almost constantly due to the fact that the enemy is so close, and they're highly concerned about saboteurs, infiltrators, and spies getting in. It doesn't look good for Kiev, which we used to call in English Kiev, which is the Russian pronunciation. The Ukrainians are saying pronounce it Kiev out of respect for our language and our capital, so Kiev is called. But it's not like if Kiev falls, the Ukraine will fall. You can see from the Ukrainian people, they are not, their love of their country doesn't come from the love of a monarch that lives in Kiev. And they'll keep fighting for the last inch of the country. And I think the Russians, if they waste all their finest units and supplies taking the city, they will have taken nothing. Just like Napoleon took Moscow and then had to retreat. He had lost all his military forces and didn't have strength enough to hold Russia. And I think it will be pretty much the same way for the Russians. So they're desperate. One alarming story that came out was the Russians are asking the Chinese for military assistance, even rations. So this invasion of the Ukraine is so badly planned that I infer that the Russian military don't like the fact that their country for the last 20 years has been run by the KGB, or the FSB as it's called now. And they're doing to Putin, by such bad military planning and execution, what the military did to Carter when he attempted to rescue the Iran hostages. They muffed it all up, gave him the worst units to work with, and then it failed, and he had egg all over his face, and he was embarrassed. And this war would stop immediately if America had a strong president. And I think if you read From Rome, you know I'm a very substantial critic and by no means a supporter of Trump, although I used to think very highly of him. But I do think that if he was president of the United States, this war would end in a week, because he'd just get a phone call to Putin and put Putin in his place, and then that would be the end of it. So when Americans don't defend election integrity, wars break out in other parts of the world, because America is the de facto police of the world, whether people like it or not. But tyrants fear the U.S. power. And why is that? Because the gross national product of Russia is about 1/15 that of the United States. So Russia should fear the United States. We can produce 15 times more military equipment than they. And Russia's economy is dwarfed even by China. So the real superpowers in the world now are China and the United States. And the myth of Russia as a threat to Europe is gone. It's destroyed. The Ukrainians wiped it out. And any country that is sufficiently supplied with military weapons and has a desire to defend itself has no need to fear Russia. If they're populous like the Ukraine of 40 million, 42 million is Poland. The Baltic states are very small. They would have to have help from someone else. And the governments of other nations are realizing this. Finland and Sweden broke their long tradition of strict neutrality in Europe, and they actually sent military aid to the Ukraine. So people are waking up that a community of nations that respects the sovereign integrity of one another, at least that much, is beneficial to everyone, whether you like their governments or not. And that doesn't mean that everything's going to be peace and dandy. I published a story today from Rome showing the absolute horrific, nightmarish, Orwellian response the Chinese Communist Party is having to their new pandemic. So they're sending in just like thousands of people in full biohazard suits to round up 70,000 people in a town and take them all to recovery camps to prevent the spread of the new contagion. And we have to pay attention to what's going on in China in these affairs, because this is the kind of stuff they want to come in the West. And we need to defend human rights and human liberty and show and always emphasize real science as a proper response. I read today that one of the first papers that Fauci ever wrote in 2008, he studied the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918-19, and he and his colleagues concluded that most people died of pneumonia because they wore masks. So some people know exactly what they're advocating, and they should hang for it. And that is my coverage for the news today from Warsaw about the Ukraine and current events. I remind you always, and I do these reports also to encourage you to support me in my apostolic works here in Warsaw. Humanitarian works, my goal is to set up a temporary hostel for refugees who need a place to stay, whether a night or a week or a month or several months, where they can eat and sleep in a warm place and feel safe. I found a nice place I think I can rent, so I'm going to take a look at it on Saturday morning. But it means that the humanitarian fund will have to raise about $10,000 a month to cover expenses. So we're at already $3,177, and the fundraising began at the beginning of March. So we're on goals to maybe about 6,000 March. We're going to have to increase that and maintain it at a high level. And this facility is big enough to house 27 refugees. It has 4 private bedrooms, and it has a hall big enough. And it's already outfitted with beds since it was a hostel. So this will be wonderful. To run it, I'm going to need volunteers. So if you want to come to Poland and volunteer for a week, or 2 weeks, or a month, I got the 4. That place would be great because it has 4 bedrooms. I got volunteers who want to stay the night there and manage and run the place because one fire cannot do everything. And that's the humanitarian work I'm organizing here in Poland. And if you are a Ukrainian American, or you know a Ukrainian Catholic in any part of the world, please share my videos and appeals with them, because I'd like to find some veterans of NATO or North American military forces who are Ukrainian Catholics, so that they could recruit for Ordo Militaris. There have been reported some problems with the Foreign Legions organization and recruiting lately. I don't know how substantial that, but I think the best plan for those who actually want to contribute to the war effort is to organize beforehand, before you actually cross the border into the Ukraine. And having an office here in Warsaw will enable us to do that. So anyone who'd like to be a recruiter for us, start a Facebook page or things like that, call our number in Warsaw. You'll see it in the show notes of this video shortly after it's published. And we can coordinate from that. But only recruit people you know. We don't want any Russian spies. That might be how a certain place got bombed recently. And here I want to emphasize how the error of pacifism leads to people's death. There are a lot of people in the West that are opposing their government supporting the Ukraine. Now, I know that most of you have no political influence, so you're not really actually responsible. But if we push the pacifist line that you shouldn't send arms to the Ukraine, you're just making the war worse, that's like saying don't come to the help of a woman being raped or abused by her husband, because she'll only get more abused. And those who want the Ukraine to surrender are kind of like people who want the wife to tell the husband, I won't call the police anymore. And, the next day he murders her. So pacifism is deadly in war, and we should stop advocating it, because if the Ukraine can get overwhelming supplies and material in a short time, they can defeat the Russians. Because war is not won by having just more stuff. You have to have more stuff in a shorter time than the enemy to overwhelm him and take back your positions. And if the Russian forces are driven substantially out of the territory they've gained, then there'll be heavy pressure on Putin from within Russia to end this war. And his armies might even start deserting in mass, and there'll be revolution in Russia to take down the tyrannical system. And that requires us all to be advocates of coming to the aid of the Ukraine. They're innocent. The people there are innocent. It's not their fault they're being attacked, and the more we can assist them, the better. So if you have any connections with the governments of your countries anywhere in the world, urge them to send the maximum amount of material, military and humanitarian supplies to the Ukraine. They need every little one of it now. And if you would like to support me and my expenses for my hermitage in Italy or here at Rome, I published today a post about that because I still have these expenses. I don't use any of the funds raised by Ordo Militaris or its work in no way go towards me. I have to support myself by my own begging. So God bless you, and thank you for listening to these reports from Rome. Please share them and help me get more viewers and to get the message out, because this is my lifeline for material support for the apostle I'm doing here for Ordo Militaris. God bless you. Have a nice day.